the long run discussion is all about, again, about risk and reward. I mean, sure, you can run for like 3 hours or something, or 2.5, but I don't see the sense in this, let's say, extra hour for one single run, because I don't see the huge reward I can gain physiologically in comparison to the risk I go, because running 2.5 hours is massive when we take a look on your tendons, when we take a look on your also maybe energy balance, your muscle density and everything. And honestly, I've never done that.
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm your host, Dirk. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit TrainingPeaks.com for more training and coaching resources. My guest today is German-based coach Björn Geesmann. He has a coaching company called HYCYS. We talk about everything from wind tunnel testing to what should your long run look like as an age group Ironman athlete. And this is coming from a pretty big name expert who coaches big names such as pro triathletes Patrick Lange and Kat Matthews. Hope you enjoy today's episode and can learn a thing or two to apply to your training. All right, Björn Geesmann, thank you so much. We snatched you out of the air as you flew across America on your way to Texas. We're here in Boulder, Colorado, and you're from Germany. And it's such an honor to have you in. Tell us, why are you flying through the States right now? Why are you over here?
Thanks for having me. Mainly on my way to the Ironman in Texas. Bit of a wrong direction now, but I've never been to Boulder before. And I thought if I already fly like 10 hours to the US, then I can put in some extra flights and fly to Boulder first. And in like 3 days, I'm flying to Houston, and then on Saturdays, the Ironman in Texas. Having 2 athletes I coach that are racing in Texas.
Patrick and Kat.
Yeah. Hopefully flying home with I say double win. I wanted to say double podium, but I'll take the American confidence and I say double win.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm here for.
All right.
And then I had a pretty productive day today. With your guys here in your TrainingPeaks office.
Super.
Discussing everything about automations and marketing and learning management. And so, that was fun. So very first good day in the US.
Yeah, super great to hear. And tell us about your coaching business. You have different locations and labs and testing, and you're doing a whole lot besides coaching 6 pros.
So
not like that wasn't enough.
HYCYS is our, I mean, if we say coaching business, it's definitely our main one. So coaching itself, but we're also doing performance testings, having 3 performance labs running in Germany. So northern, western, southern Germany in Hamburg, Cologne, and Munich. We are a team of like 15 to 18 sports scientists working there. But we also have to include the bike fittings, which we definitely do a lot by now. And that's let's say the main job. Normally I say that coaching of pro athletes is my hobby. And the rest is the job. So traveling around and
you have the lives of 6 pros in the palm of your hands.
Yeah, that's it. And therefore, HYCYS is the main business and the business I'm running since like nearly 10 years now.
Yeah, and not just Germans. I mean, you're getting some Americans signing up. Right?
Yeah, we got in the last years. The more often I'm on English-speaking podcasts, not that it is related to that, but the more often you coach any pros and then get some attention, not only from Germany, but probably international attention. We do a lot of races in the US, for example, like with Patrick winning Ironman Tulsa like 3 years ago, Kat last year. Tulsa, yeah. Oklahoma, yeah. And Kat in Texas last year, and then Kona is always a thing. So therefore, I'm linked quite often to the US, and I love to be here. So therefore, we also have a lot of American athletes by now. Yeah, that's and they are coming from like, I know that Boulder is a thing, San Francisco is a thing, also New York City, which is interesting because I mean, completely different training locations.
Yeah.
And therefore, yeah, but mainly German speaking, but also whole Europe. A lot of people from Switzerland, for example, Austria is a thing, Denmark is a thing. So therefore, yeah, pretty wide.
Yeah. What about your background? You master's exercise physiology.
Yeah, I have a master's degree in sports science, I would say. So sports science, but performance related. So I studied at this German sports university, and did my bachelor's degree there, and then the master's degree in exercise science and coaching. And yeah, that's what I did. But honestly, Dirk, we have to face the truth. I think it's like 12 years ago now. So I'm 36. Ended the master in 2012, I think. So yeah, and since then doing some self-studying, like all the coaches I know, reading papers, doing podcast with some knowledge about training science, also on my own to always stay into science. And then if you have a good team around, like we have with the sports scientists at HYCYS, for example, we have colleagues there that are still at the university, some doing their PhD, some are coming directly from university. And that's how you always also keep yourself up to date. And I mean, it's a lot to learn, especially in pro sports, and especially with the complexity of triathlon. I do pretty often take out some papers about heat adaptation, or about ice bath, or about inflammation after whatever doing Ironmans, for example. And therefore try to keep myself up to date. But yeah, I studied sports science.
So you haven't told us about wind tunnels yet, and I think you have one in the works, right?
Yeah, I think now by knowing it and having fun with it, I think everyone should have a wind tunnel.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah, exactly.
That's yeah, definitely an interesting one. So we built a wind tunnel in southern Germany, in Bavaria. Special about the wind tunnel is it's only for cyclists and triathletes. Second special one, which is very interesting, is that it's a so-called Göttinger wind tunnel, which is the technique of the wind tunnel, which means the air is streamed in circles, let's say. And therefore you can imagine the wind tunnel building just being like an, how do you say it? Like a round circle. Tube. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good thing about it is that it's therefore independent from outside conditions. So the typical wind tunnel in Europe, for example, is mainly built for the automobile industry. And as cars don't care if it's cold outside, you can have the air from the outside streamed on the car with whatever, 250 k's per hour. And the car has no problem with it. But if you take an athlete or a female or male person, and you have bolder conditions when you want to, or German conditions, which like are pretty similar in these days.
Yeah.
And then you take the air, stream it on the athlete, then you can guarantee the cold the day after. And therefore the typical automobile wind tunnel is, you can't use it the whole year round. You can normally just use it if you have outside temperatures up to, let's say, 16, 17, 18 degrees minimum. Because you can imagine if it's 16 degrees outside and you have the air streamed with, let's say, 50 k's per hour, still pretty cold.
Yes.
And our wind tunnel is independent from outside temperature. So we can test the whole year round. And especially for cyclists and triathletes, if you have in mind how the season looks like and you would be dependent on the outside temperature and can test in, let's say, May, June, July, that's where you should do races but not aero testing. And therefore it's a really great wind tunnel where I think it totally makes sense that a lot of cyclists and triathletes are joining us for wind tunnel testings, especially in, let's say, autumn, winter, spring. And we are the only ones in Europe that can test at these times. Plus, as the wind tunnel is specific for cyclists and triathletes, it's a bit smaller than for cars, because we do not have to have wind speeds of, let's say, 300 k's per hour. And therefore, we save a lot of energy. I mean, if you see the turbines and the energy costs we have in a week or per test or in a month, they are, let's say, pretty normal to a normal household.
Yeah.
And therefore, the whole testing gets also at some point affordable, let's say, for cyclists and triathletes.
Yeah. So how long might a session take? What would someone expect what would that protocol look like going through it?
So if you just take the wind tunnel session, we always have to divide it into position testings. And then you can have a bunch of material testings, for example, whatever you want to test, whether it's wheels, helmets, suits, aero calves, bottles, and so on and so on. And the session for the positioning, which everyone can book on our website, for example, is normally like 3.5, depending a little bit, maybe 4 hours long. Additional to that session, you'll always should include time to spend in a bike fitting lab, because what you need before you go in the wind tunnel is a solid, stable position you created on your bike, which means you should find out which saddle fits you best, how the position exactly should look like, if you are really sitting stable on your saddle or if you are shifting on it to always readjust the position and sit in a different way. And then it's like the typical session for, let's say, age group person, amateur athletes, looks like 3-4 hours in the bike fitting lab, maybe, if you never been there before. And then another 3 hours in the wind tunnel for the positioning. And then it depends on whether you want to do material tests, yes or no. It's always a good marketing thing to have the material testings included, because that's what we learned in the last years about aerodynamics, that your wheel, your bike, your helmet, your suit, whatsoever,
your
is
socks.
so many watts better at this and that pace. But if you have a little insight in aerodynamics, you realize it's all about you. So therefore, you are, as the athlete sitting on the bike, the one the air resistance is dependent on. So, and you can say that up to, let's say, 70, 75, maybe 80% of your air resistance is dependent on your position.
Right.
And that's what the wind tunnel is for, to create best CDA values.
Yeah. So are you doing lab testing in the aero position as well? You know, how does that relate to actually doing the test and like your threshold? Can you do a threshold up high or in their tuck position? You know, are you relating that at all to testing?
Good point. And that's general answer first and then the concrete one. But that's the good stuff about science. It's an open end. So when I remember now the concrete answer, when I remember we had a preparation with Patrick Lange for the Ironman Worlds in Nice last year. And I know his performance since minimum 3 years. We had in these 3 years, I would say, I don't know, like 5 to 6 bike fitting sessions, 3 to 4 sessions in the velodrome, 3 to 4 sessions in the wind tunnel. Then there comes the race in Nice, and you realize this is the first time an Ironman World Championships has about 2,500 meters in altitude on the bike course.
Right.
And then you ask yourself the question about, is the TT bike really the one you want to pick? Or are you maybe better with a road bike having an aero cockpit on? And if you want to answer this question, then you need to have the biomechanical perspective, because you have a different position, even if you nearly rebuild it on the road bike, but it's different. Then you have the aerodynamical perspective, because the TT bike is normally better, but if the road bike is probably better, for example, from the biomechanical perspective, how many losses you want to count in aerodynamical wise? So would it be fine if the road bike is, let's say, 5 watts worse in aerodynamics at race speed, for example? And then you got the physiological perspective from it, because when biomechanics change, also physiology changes, because you probably need more or less oxygen depending on how economical you are in the position of on your road bike or on your TT bike.
Yeah.
Long story short, I mean, even with all the experience before from performance testings, bike fittings, aero testings in the wind tunnel, in the velodrome, it took us like minimum, I would say 3-4 complete days to find out which bike to pick.
Wow. Because of Nice.
Just because of Nice.
Yep.
Not included the personal feedback of the athlete who went to Nice, took both bikes. Because, I mean, you know that a descent on your bike can't be measured in a way you like feel it, for example.
Right.
And you can't say how the brakes work. You need to test it. And you need to have the personal feedback of the athlete. And in the end, it was the TT bike. But
so the same bike as what he might use in
same
Kona.
bike then as normal, different build-up, way lighter than before. Credits to his bike sponsor for doing all this testings with us. But if you see the difference between the TT bike and the road bike, you wouldn't expect that the difference would be so small. And therefore the answer, so let's say, I don't want to say complicated, but really needed to be on point. So the difference in aerodynamics, for example, between the TT bike and the road bike are way smaller than you think.
And he ended up getting second.
Yes.
Yeah.
Greetings to Sam Laidlow.
Yes.
Good job. Well done. a bit slower would have been great, but second was also fine.
Well, we jumped way forward. We started talking about Patrick and Nice and bikes and everything around this professional. So why don't you take us back and tell us who you coach?
Patrick is the longest one by now. So we started working together autumn, winter 19, when he had a pretty bad year and needed to DNF in Kona. And then we started working with a special year in 2020 because we all remember the COVID time. And he did one race in 2020, which was a 70.3 in Poland, because honestly, that was the only race on the menu. And then, 2021, the race calendar got halfway normal. We were here in the US having the first long distance race together in Tulsa in Oklahoma, which was North American Championship at that point. And he won Tulsa and Roth in the same year, which was great. And now we're working together since like 4 or 5 years. Highlight, definitely stuff like winning races like in Tulsa or in Roth in Israel, for example, but also becoming second in Nice. But these are just the results. I mean, if you see the whole process, when I started working with him, I got often asked how I want to improve his bike riding, because swimming was good, bike riding not, running was good.
Yeah.
That was the media attention on. And I said, I think I'll find a way to increase his bike riding, but I definitely also find a way to increase his running performance. And everyone more or less laughed at me. And if you now see his running times from 2:39 were like the best ever in triathlon. And now if we see how especially long distance triathlon developed, over time, we are now, definitely cracked the 2:30 hour mark this year, I guess. I bet.
And he's the first to go under sub 8 in Kona.
He was. And I think now we have there was a year where there were 2 people being under 8 hours, I think. So Patrick and Bart Arnolds, I think, who got second in that race. Was it 17 or 18?
18, I believe.
17 was Lionel second?
I can't
or the other way around. Something like that. And he's, I think he has the 4 or 5 best running performance in long distance triathlon so far. Yeah. So 2:30 twice, 2:32 Nice, 2:35 is like you can wake him up at 4 a.m. to run a 2:35 on a long distance race. So, and then there's Patrick, and then I coach Kat Matthews, who was also here for the Ironman Texas and will be here this year again. So last year she won it, and hopefully we can make it again this year. And then I have Jan Stratmann, German triathlete, one of the younger ones, let's say. He got third last year at the 70.3 Worlds. And then still for me, a very interesting topic is Patrick Nielsen, who also won Texas, I think like 3 times already. Because he struggled with a really unpopular injury in the last years. And there was coaching on with a different goal, probably. So normally when you think of coaching and athletes and performance and pro sports and everything, you think in races and doing pro triathlon, probably whatever, earning your money with it and all the stuff like that. But with Patrick, it was more like the question if he will ever make his way back to pro triathlon. And he really suffered a lot from injuries or from a specific injury in the last years. And to me, it was great to have all this learning also from the medical perspective about the injury and how to deal with it, and starting with the process, finding out where his problem was. And there was really, I don't want to say fun because it wasn't fun at some point, but really special. And therefore I'll definitely count him in and hope that he's gonna finish a race in 2024 again. And therefore we'll see.
Nice. You know, I've heard you speak in the past too about the psychology side of being a coach, and just being a scientist does not make you a good coach per se. So can you delve into that for us? And what does that really mean? How do you go from being a scientist to becoming a coach, and why is that so much of a psychological endeavor?
Yeah, I think coaching is more psychology than anything else. Sure, you need to know about training science and physiology and the stuff that works to develop physiologically. But I mean, if we take coaching itself, I mean, what does it mean? If you coach someone, you support him, you give him some kind of guidance. And sure, you do it by a training plan that has training science in the back, but you mainly do it on a personal relationship. And therefore, and I'm saying that, and I was the first one who skipped the psychological courses at university when studied sports science, because honestly, I didn't believe all that, and I wasn't into it, and not a single bit interested in psychology. Because I wanted to know about VO2 max values, and I wanted to know about what training I need to have higher VO2 max values or something like that. And then I learned all the sports science stuff, and then I got into coaching, and then I realized that you can know everything about mitochondrial adaptation. Not that I do know, but just as an example. But you need to transfer your knowledge to the athlete, and it's always a different way depending on who is the athlete to coach. Sometimes you explain to the athlete why you're doing this and that. Sometimes the athlete doesn't care for physiology. It's just your job as a coach to improve his physiology. That's it. And that's what I learned about the psychological part of coaching. And then I realized pretty early when being a coach in pro triathlon that there are several tools missing in the daily coaching and in the daily life and in the daily relationship with the athlete. And then I started to have a mental coaching degree. And the first thing I learned in that mental coaching degree was not about tools I could use for athletes, but honestly, I learned a lot about myself and about personalities and why you're thinking in that way in this situation and why you're acting like this and why this annoys you and why you love to do this and how this motivates you and everything like that. And that helped me a lot. And then I also learned about, like from personalities and how you should interact with different types of personalities, what tools you could use, what techniques are probably the ones to try out, and there was at least some kind of self-learning about the psychological part of coaching. And now, after let's say like 5-6 years of coaching in pro sports, I would definitely say that it's more important than anything else.
Yeah. So the personality profiling, are you actually going through this with the athlete? Like, or is this intuition that you're gathering along the way to figure out how to communicate with the individual?
So they are all doing a personality test. So that's what I started with at some point, because I realized that if you really have good personality tests, then it makes totally sense to bring some objectives in what you think how they are, or what they think how they are. And a good objective test can definitely help you. And it's quite often that I take these test results, which are now, let's say, minimum 2 to 3 years old, depending on which athlete we are talking about. But I sometimes take this piece of paper, read it again. So do I with my personality test, which is sure special. Right. And then you realize again, in certain situations in life, why this causes whatever anxiety at the moment,
right.
Why this makes you feel happy or motivates you, why you should rethink this one, because you tend to act like this, whatever, when this motivates you or brings you down or something. And that really helps me a lot. And therefore, I think the personality tests are great. I can only speak for one I'm using, so a pretty simple one. And it's an implicit test, so not like questions and you need to answer, but more implicit. But I'm not going through it with the athlete, because then we need to look at the next step. The question is, am I the coach? Yes. Am I also the mental coach? Somehow, yes.
Yeah.
But then the question is still if that is enough. I mean, or if it makes sense to bring even a psychologist or sports psychologist into it. And I can say that all of the athletes I'm working with are having an additional psychologist they are working with, which is great, because then you have some more interaction also from, let's say, a real expert. I'm just a mental coach who did a little degree, and I did not study 12 years of psychology. So am I maybe a halfway okay coach, but if my athletes or the athletes I coach are doing a bike fitting, I hand them over to a colleague of mine who is mainly running our wind tunnel, and he's the one doing the bike fittings with them, because he's doing it every day.
Yeah.
He's doing it. He's, I think, the best bike fitter in the world, or best aerodynamic fitter in the world. And that's the reason why he is now working in our wind tunnel. And that's the reason why all of the athletes I coach are going to him, because he can do it 100 times better than I can. And so it is with the psychologist. So it is with the nutritionist. So it is with, I mean, we can continue with this one. I'm just there for bringing all this knowledge together, doing the daily job. And hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I love that team aspect of coaching. You know, you are the head coach, kind of central coordinator, if you will. But you realize your strengths and weaknesses as a coach, and you bring in experts where they can add to the mix for the benefit of the athlete. So that's definitely, a growing trend. Obviously, we're seeing that within Tour de France teams, having the nutritionist, the strength coach, sports psychologist, and I think more and more coaches are leveraging that concept. So that's really, really powerful.
Two important aspects. First of all, you need to know that you're not the one knowing it all. So if you think you can do psychology best and bike fitting best and training science best and physiology best, then this doesn't work out.
Yeah.
And that's fine for me. So I'm 100% sure that there are a lot of experts out there in the different specifics who do way better bike fittings than I do. And the second aspect is I want to be, like you said, the head coach who is in the end responsible for the question, what knowledge of which expert do I bring into the training of the athletes? Because in the end, it's also my responsibility as the head coach who has to decide if this implementation from the nutritionist is going fine, or if it's maybe whatever, too much, too strict, too less with a view on whether the athlete likes it, yes or no. Same for the bike fitting. You can do extreme positions, you can do comfortable positions, you can do whatever. You can do aero testings. I mean, if I see the hours I could aero test even throughout a season, normally I would say, yeah, we'll definitely find material and stuff so that an aero test twice a month makes probably sense. But in the end, the question is always, does it really make you faster in the end? Or is it maybe also too much effort organizational wise to travel to the wind tunnel, for example? Right. And then in the end, there needs to be someone around the athlete who is the head coach, who is responsible for answering these questions. And that's what I'm absolutely fine with. To say it in other words, as long as I can be the one having the last word, they can all give me their knowledge. I'm more than happy to share also everything I know with everyone else. So, I mean, I've not invented training science. There are other people who...
Well, it's ever evolving.
That's it.
Right? Yeah. It's not stuck in, we're not stuck in time. We
absolutely.
Have to realize that.
And I think it's fun for me to share it. Yeah. So I have a German speaking podcast running where we talk a lot about training science and everything. So every time someone tells you there's a miracle going on and you are not allowed to get any insights, it's not good. You can be 100% sure. Yeah. So therefore, I'm more from the perspective that sharing knowledge is fine. And therefore, I'm more than happy if anyone else shares knowledge with me and we can discuss it and evolve it. And in the end, if there are some good informations I can bring into the coaching process, more than happy.
Yeah. You've talked about some of the specialties that you'll bring in. What about on the strength side? Are you, for like the age grouper, do you suggest any kind of like comprehensive movement assessment? And I know in Europe, physio is like really well-known, profession, but here we tend to have strength trainers, personal trainers, but then we have a separate, physical therapist, but it feels like in Europe it's more blended together. So what might you recommend to age groupers in terms of the strength, movement, mobility side of the sport?
Extremely important. Should minimum be the fourth discipline. Forget about brick sessions as the fourth discipline.
You heard it here first.
The fourth discipline is doing athletic training, mobility, going to the physio, you name it.
Especially like me over age 50.
Honestly, it doesn't matter. To my athletes, it's mandatory to visit a physio. So I would never ever coach an athlete who says that he doesn't need to go to the physio, because that would mean he has not understand the importance of caring for his body beside swimming, biking, and running.
Right.
And so it is with whether it comes to mobility or strength training and everything. And then again, I have the main, let's say, problem in the end that we talk about remote coaching. I mean, the athletes I coach are based in Salzburg in Austria, in UK, in Denmark, and in Germany, but 500 kilometers away from me. So I do not see them every morning, and I do not do mobility sessions with them. So therefore, there needs to be someone else giving me the information how the athlete is doing. Sure, the athlete can give the information to me, which he got from the physio or from the whatever, from the doctor or from the chiropractic or whatever. But there needs to be someone laying hands on the athlete, feeling how whatever stiff, imbalanced whatsoever the athlete is, and therefore I think it's absolutely mandatory. And we means all the athletes out there, whether professional or amateur, should definitely have a big eye on all that stuff, which means athletic training and mobility and everything. And it's a little bit probably how psychology was to me when I was at the university, that you do not really know why. So, I mean, a stronger bike performance comes mainly from riding your bike. So it is with running, and so it is with swimming. But if you see athletic training and you see the benefits it can have for swimming, biking, and running, and now let's get into detail. If it comes to, for example, bike riding, and you take your upper body as, let's say, the anchor of your legs, and if that upper body and that anchor is not stiff and strong and fixed enough, then you're going to jump on your saddle with every pedal stroke you do. Let's talk about running performances and mainly running economy. If you want to have a good running economy, and in my opinion, that is the main metrics to look at when it comes to, especially in pro sports, to running performance, then for good running economy, you need absolutely a good upper body strength, for example, a good mobility in your hip, everything that belongs to, let's say, whatever is activated while you're running, your glutes, the stimulus of your glute that you are able to activate it, extremely important for running. I mean, sounds maybe a bit odd, but take a look at the glutes of Patrick, probably one of his strongest muscles he has, and definitely enabling him to this run performances. Whereas we as amateur athletes, let's think when last time we felt our glute muscles after running the day before. Pretty rare. That doesn't happen very often, to be honest. But that's where we want to go to. So bringing your body, due to athletic training and everything, to the point that you are able to activate your glutes. You are able to really have a strong upper body performance while running, so that you are not having your shoulders sinked in after half an hour and losing every economy you potentially have. And therefore, it's extremely important.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you're going to go into a marathon having done the bike. So any weak link in that bike is going to be 10 times, 20 times worse on the run. So absolutely. So how about like traditional strength training? Obviously you only coach pros now, but for age groupers, I would assume that physio is going to advise for you the amount of actual strength training to do per week.
Yeah. So definitely best case to have someone around who also gives insights in which workouts, for example, to do. I mean, strength training, if we just see the possibilities we have, then it's a huge amount of philosophies we can do. It's a huge amount of different techniques we can use. But in the end, I mean, it has to be functional. There should be someone else who at least gives you a bit of guidance, probably not every day, but to check if you're in balance, if you're doing it right and everything. And then if we get into strength training, I mean, let's point out the different types. So I would say a triathlete doesn't need hypertrophy training, because weighing more and more doesn't make sense, especially for the run. And I do not see a sense in muscle volume itself. So no real goal for me. But if you, for example, take neuromuscular training, max strength training, for example, and see how it can beneficially affect the whole neuromuscular system, for example, then it totally makes sense to do it.
Activation, yeah.
Activation and everything. But then when we discuss max strength training, we definitely have to discuss the risk and reward you have from it. Because, I mean, we talk about athletes who already have a training schedule of, like, let's say minimum 30 to 35 hours per week. If you then, on these, let's say 50 to 60 to 70 running kilometers, plus 20 hours of bike riding, plus the whole swimming volume at max strength training, you have to be very sure that your whole training stress balance is going okay. Because otherwise, the risk can be extremely high and the reward extremely low. Answer to the athletes I coach, I did a bit of strength training, or a bit more with Patrick in winter, for example. Sounds weird, but to gain weight. So to gain this half a kilo or kilogram more, because weight in this case means sure fat-free mass. So more muscular mass which makes sense every time we talk about flat races, and long distance triathlon races are always flat, except Nice World Championships. So, and then this kilogram more, or half a kilo to kilogram more, I know that it doesn't affect negatively his running performance, but it can maybe bring us some benefits on the bike ride, for example. And therefore, we did some more strength training than normal, plus the advices from the nutritionist to really have these effects you want to have by some extra protein, for example, some more extra energy to gain this kilogram of fat-free mass, for example. Yeah. And then when the training of the season is in full swing, and if we are really in training camp and everything, then we switch to athletic training. Then it's body weight only training, for example, maybe a little bit of strength training, but not hypertrophy, but more like strength endurance. Weird word, I think, strength and endurance in one, but we know all what is meant. So, and then it's fine. Yeah. And then it's the combination and also the continuous job you have to do. If you are not doing it every week, like twice or 3 times, then in my opinion, it doesn't make sense. So you'll have to have it as a continuous session in your training plan, and not only once a week, but maybe 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, and something you can balance along with everything else. That's what you kind of went back to, like the risk reward of adding this additional major stressor, but keeping it at the minimum dose to maintain is definitely something to think about. And then that might be a good segue into running volume. And, certainly in age groupers, many of them, big topic is the long run, right? So what should the long run rule of thumb be for age groupers? And I'm sure you're going to relate that back somehow to overall workload. But how do you think about that for age groupers in the long run? But for somebody, obviously talking Ironman.
You said that you normally do not long podcasts, but I think the long run can be something.
You can go for it. New record.
That could definitely last for hours. Maybe we do it a bit provocative.
All right. Provocative.
Sorry. Just having an eye on long runs doesn't make sense. So, because if you do not see the context of training, and especially also running in a training block, in a training week, or in several training weeks in a row, then it doesn't make sense. I mean, where's the difference between running 1.5 hours or 2 hours? Physiologically, we would say, sure, it's half an hour more oxygen consumption, maybe a bit more fat metabolism due to lower glycogen stores at the end of the run, for example. But honestly, if you just have an eye on the long run without taking into account what you, for example, did on the day before or what you will do on the day after, doesn't make sense to me. So you can have 3 1.5 hour runs within 4 days of training. And then by definition, we would say there's no long run in there, but you ran 4.5 hours. So we'll mean for Patrick, 65 to 70 kilometers in 4 days.
Yeah.
So that's a density of running volume.
Yes.
And that will definitely have an impact on his performance. But by definition, there's no long run in there. And then the long run discussion is all about risk and reward. I mean, sure, you can run for like 3 hours or something, or 2.5. But I don't see the sense in this, let's say, extra hour for one single run, because I don't see the huge reward I can gain physiologically in comparison to the risk I go, because running 2.5 hours is massive when we take a look on your tendons, when we take a look on your also maybe energy balance, your muscle density and everything. And honestly, I've never done that. So Patrick's running volume is like 50 Ks in average. Kat's is like 35 to 40 K throughout the whole year. Consistency is key. Long runs, or the discussion about long runs, in my opinion, doesn't make sense. And I would completely skip them. The only reason I see where a long run makes sense is psychological wise, especially if you're an amateur athlete and you are training for your, let's say, first Ironman, and you do not have a single clue what happens after 20 Ks in a run, let's say, then it could probably make sense to have the goal in the whole training process that once on your way to whatever, the Ironman in Texas, you want to see this 30-kilometer mark, or how many miles is it?
18.
Thank you. And that could make sense. So before you create any anxiety about whatever happens after 20 Ks, find it out in training, because there it's way better than in the race. And then realizing that you fueled yourself not good enough, for example. Yeah. And therefore it does make sense to probably run a bit longer. But if you take the context of running volume itself, and we talk about training adaptation, then risk and reward is a big thing for long run. And the longest run I write down in training plans, 1.5 hours for the pros, but they can do like 3 of them in 4 days. Mm-hmm. For an age grouper, 2 hours is the absolute maximum. I never wrote down more than that.
Well, you think about the recovery profile after a 3-hour run, and how many days is that going to take? And the effect, the after effect of not doing the rest of the training, is the negative side of doing that 3-hour run, for example.
100%. And then, I mean, again, let's take a closer look into the science behind. You have a huge inflammation answer after that long run of 2.5 or 3 hours. And then, like you said, if we talk about immunological answers, inflammation answer, if we then, and we take into account that you do it like more often, if you then see the risk for bone mineral density, for example, stuff like that takes so long to recover and impairs, like you said, the upcoming training of the next days, that it's definitely this one rest day to recover well and then go back to normal training. You minimum need more and more days. Mm-hmm. You minimum will have a longer inflammation answer even on the second or third day after this run. And again, we just talk about the risk. What is the reward from it? If you want to have fat metabolism training, I mean, think of training on lower glycogen stores. Yeah. And then you can start your 1-hour run with, let's say, glycogen stores that are filled by 60%. And this is what you achieve after 1.5 hours of running, starting with full glycogen stores. Yeah. So the effect is basically the same. Maybe not exactly the same. But if you want to have a good running fat metabolism, think of periodizing carbohydrates linked to your training and not about the duration of one single run, for example. Right. So it is for the bike rides. I mean, sure, biking longer is easy because you do not have this impact running has, and inflammation isn't nearly there because especially without the impact, you don't create that. You don't create these injuries in your muscles like you do while running. Therefore, it's easy. But again, if you have a 6-hour bike ride, I mean, take into account the energy balance of that day, for example, and how you can get the balance back in energy, for example, in energy intake, energy expenditure. Yeah. And therefore, it's easier, but it's the same. If you want to train your fat metabolism, think of glycogen stores and how you can affect them by periodizing your nutrition. Yeah. And honestly, if you see triathletes training, and if they train more than 12, 13, 14 hours a week, then you can be sure there's no, in my opinion, no big need to periodize carbohydrates, for example, as that happens if you ride after a swim in the morning and you have normal breakfast in between, you can be sure that your glycogen stores are not 100% filled because you had a 1.5 hour swim in the morning and therefore spend a lot of carbohydrates. And therefore it's not like carbohydrate depleted, but they are definitely not full. So this will have an impact. Yeah. And then you can decide how your breakfast looks like. And then you can have a perfect ride where you can train your fat metabolism for 3 hours in an absolute great way. And it's great.
Well, I assume you're not ever advising fasted workouts.
I mean, the difference between fasted and lower glycogen stores is physiological wise, I would guess more or less the same in the case of adaptation, but the risk, if you do it fasted, is way higher. So why doing it then? So, and I think fasted could make sense if it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes before you leave to work, you train indoors, you get a coffee, put your clothes on, and then hop on your indoor trainer and then go for 45 minutes, but you do not really have the aim of having a bigger breakfast before, fine. I mean, if it's half an hour or 45 minutes, you can also do it in a fasted state and it will be okay. Maybe a little snack to have the signal for your body that there are carbohydrates coming, so you can easily spend them on this ride. And then I don't see a problem there. But I don't see a reason why I would do it much longer. So I wouldn't see a reason in a, let's say, 2.5, 3 hour fasted state, right? Because you can easily have breakfast with proteins, with fats, maybe a bit of carbohydrates. And just from my perspective and the knowledge I also scientifically see, that they are not really a big difference in between. So therefore, protein and fat intake doesn't hamper the fat metabolism in the ride you'll have after it. So therefore, fine.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, any kind of like final words of advice, if you will, or what's your fundamentals of your training methodology as it relates to an age group, or what are some like kind of rules of thumb that you stand behind, and even with the pros, that for pros and age groupers that really are something that are absolutes for you?
Honestly, I do not have the book of philosophy with me, and I do not really often think about it, to be honest. But what I often see, especially in amateur sports, is don't make it too complicated. I mean, triathlon is swim, bike, and run. We're talking about like athletic training and strength training and mobility, fine. But the more complex the sport is, and I do not know any sport that is more complex than triathlon, the more you probably tend to lose yourself in information, in techniques, in whatsoever that do not really help you a lot. And therefore, I think don't make it too complicated. Take it easy. Do not take too many metrics. There's no reason why you should measure everything you can. Don't forget about training. I mean, that's the only way you get better, is solid training sessions and not spending too much time in analyzing whatsoever. And then just from my perspective, that's what I also learned personally, is that having a coach by your side can be really, really helpful. And it doesn't need to be a sports scientist. It doesn't need to be a psychologist. It can also be a good friend, a partner, whatsoever. But I think it totally makes sense at some point to have some interaction and discussions about what you're doing. You need someone, definitely you need someone that sometimes helps you to motivate you. You definitely need someone to help you if it's not really going well, for example, and therefore not doing it alone is also a thing I definitely would recommend. And just again, from my perspective, whether it comes to business stuff or learning how to coach and everything, I always have my coaches that I ask if I want to know anything about whatever time management techniques or mental coaching, or even then if I have a discussion with the bike fitters, then they are my coaches telling me how to measure aerodynamics correctly and what I should do next with the position of the athlete, for example.
Yeah, you're speaking our language. Getting deliberate practice.
That's it.
Nice. And training is boring.
It is. That's what I often read. Like, I can't stick to the training plan because there are things repeating in it. And I say like, that's
it's boring.
Sadly how it is. I mean, take into account that training is repetition and that's very often,
and rest.
That's it.
Awesome.
Very
Love
simple.
it. Thank you so much, Bjorn, for joining me today. Thanks for listening to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. Visit TrainingPeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.